give you hope.
So we're in a series called Hope is Here, okay? And in this series, we're exploring kind of the what and the how and the who of our church, which is you. Remember this one? The church. Here's the steeple. Open it up and see all the people. You are the church. We are the church, right? And I haven't talked about this in quite a while, but there is such a thing as the gathered church, which is Crossroads. We're an expression of that. And then there is the scattered church, which is you, when you leave here and you go out into your everyday normal life and you bring hope and joy and love and peace. That is the scattered church, okay? The scattered church, by the way, is not when we as an organized church do something outside the church, okay? That can be a little confusing. The scattered church is when we as individuals go out and love our enemies and we pray for those who persecute us, which are very few people if we're honest, right? And we give of ourselves outside of this institutional version of the church, okay? It's all part of it and all necessary. But we're talking about what is this corporate church experience, Crossroads, and the goal is for everyone at the end of this series to be able to say, yes, I'm in. I'm in. I believe deeply in the way in which this church understands itself and its identity within the Christian tradition. I want to be a part of it. I'm going to give my time, my talent, and my treasure. I think I can make the world a better place here. I think I can be a better person here. I'm in. Or, yeah, no, thank you. I don't think I'll be a better person for participating. I don't think this place makes the world a better place, so I'm going to go find a church that I think that does happen with. And that's wonderful, okay? I'm sad, but my job is not to get you to stay here. My job is to help you grow spiritually, to be a support for that. And if that's someplace else, then I want to help you. But I hope it's not, Randy. Please stay, okay? Randy was just sitting there totally in tune with me. I had to do it. So, all right, listen, quick review if you're new. Real quick review. Week 1, we talked about the power of connecting. Remember John Smith, the founding pastor, and I, he cheated, but we did play a big game of Connect 4. And we talked about how really life is about connection. And when we are connected, we can grow and we can flourish. And there is an enemy that's trying to block connection, and that enemy is confusion. And so what this series is about is clarity. And what are we connecting about? Well, we want to be clear on the things that connect us, the things that we share. And so we talked about connecting with a shared vision for the spiritually disconnected, the spiritually dissatisfied, the deconstructing ones, and the people who love them. And the truth is, if you yourself are in a space where you're spiritually dissatisfied, this is a wonderful place to ask lots of questions. If you're angry, if you're frustrated, if you're confused, I think this is a beautiful, beautiful atmosphere to do that. And I think to embrace the mission of Crossroads as it has always been a place for people who feel disconnected from the church. You have to love people, and you have to love people and want them to connect and grow spiritually. And so to come here to be a part of this is to set aside some of our own desires for what church might look like or feel like, or words that we might use that make sense to us but don't make sense to others. We have to set those aside to have a preferential treatment for those that are hungry and thirsty. And Jesus talked about this when he said, hey, I'm going to leave the 99 to go after the one. And the one, by the way, was pushed out. That was the truth of it. This wasn't some lost one that was erred on its theology, right? For Jesus, the sinners and the ones that were outside were pushed out by the system. And so I think to really love Crossroads, you have to be of the mindset that I come here and I want to create space for people who were like me once, dissatisfied, confused, disconnected, didn't feel that there was a space for me. And that's, I think, the heart of our vision. We talked about connecting through a shared theology, that what grounds us together is a theology of pietism and peacemaking. So if you want to go back and listen to that, you can. And then week 4, we talked about what does it mean when we say follow Christ, to live for Christ. And we talked about that means sharing our burdens together, carrying each other's burdens. Now, we're going to take a turn. We've reached part 2 of this series. And in part 2 of this series, we're going to talk about our values here at Crossroads. Our stated, core, shared values. And each week over the next 5 weeks, we're going to talk about a value that we live into and a value that we're trying to grow in ourselves as individuals, the scattered church, but also a value that we're trying to live as a community. So these are values that are not only things that we say, hey, as a corporate body, we live into, we want to be. It's also the way in which we want to form ourselves. We all want to be these 5 things, okay? So what are our 5 core values? Okay, I should pop quiz somebody who works here, but our 5 core values, right, are wisdom, fun, generosity, inclusion, and creativity. Jess said those in what Spooky Palooza puts on display. These are our 5 core values. Every week we have a staff meeting, and every week that staff meeting starts with this question: what can we celebrate from the week? Where did we see our values at play? What was right? And so we list, and sometimes you all end up on the board, and we say, this was a person who acted super generous, and this was a person who showed great wisdom. And it's funny how nobody ever is like, there was such wisdom in the message this week, Ryan. That has never happened in the weekly evaluation. I need to bring donuts or something to that meeting, right? But there's this idea of how do we celebrate this? So this is not just stuff. In fact, it's really not on a wall anywhere. You know, some people put their values on a wall and they don't do anything with it. We actually don't have it on a wall anywhere. We just say it over and over and over and over again. And the values of our church is really the how. So if vision and mission is kind of the what of our church and the why of our church, the values are how we want to accomplish this. Right? What do we want to be known as? And they articulate how we gather together, how we volunteer, how we engage in the work that's required to accomplish this mission and vision of participating in making peace in this world. And so we're going to start today with our core value of generosity. Everybody go, woo, woo! All right. How many of you want to be known in this world as greedy, stingy, selfish, mean? Raise your hand up nice and high. Okay, good. Then today's for everyone. You might have thought it wasn't. How many of you want to be known as generous, loving, hope-filled, helpful? How many of you want that for yourself? How many of you want that for your children? You're even like teenage children, middle school children, right? One of these days, you want that for your parents, right? We want this, right? So here's the thing. Today, I want you to know, I just want everybody to unclench everything. Some of you started hiding your wallets, okay? I thought about actually receiving the offering right now, just so nobody feels like this is about manipulating one offering, okay? Because that's not what this is about. And certainly I want you to understand, and I want to convince you as the leader of a nonprofit, which is what Crossroads is, I want to convince you the merits of donating financially to Crossroads Church. Why wouldn't I want to do that? Does that make sense? Like, you would seriously question if I didn't believe enough in the organization to say, hey, this is worth giving to, right? Okay, so that being said, that certainly is wonderful, but the message today and the idea of generosity is far, far bigger than making a donation, okay? Because here's the truth of it. You could get motivated today and feel really good and make a donation. You could even make a big donation, but I'm going to tell you that just in 6 weeks, it doesn't solve any problems, okay? It doesn't change you, all right? So it's about this question: what type of person do I want to be? Like, what type of church do I want to be? What type of people do I want to be a part of? What kind of energy do I want to emit out into the world? How many of y'all know that you emit energy into the world? And some of you are like, oh, it's one of those new age churches. I'm in, okay? You thought I was going to say I'm out. I know who comes to Crossroads. You're like, let's do some yoga? This is amazing. Yes, energy. Look at my crystals. You pull out all the crystals, which I'm all for. Go for it. I mean, I have no idea what they do, but hey, if it makes you more loving, more peace-filled, more joyful, more kind, then the fruit of the spirits are growing, then rub that crystal all day long, okay? Go for it. Because I've met some people that don't rub crystals, that if rubbing some crystals on them would make them kind and gentle and loving, then I would rub crystals on them instead of having them go to church. You know what I'm saying? Rub a little crystal on you. I don't care. Are we clear on crystals? All right, good. Some of you are like, but what about the bracelets that resonate? Now I've opened up Pandora's box. Okay. Listen, we all experience the energy of people. We all experience it. And sometimes we don't want to talk about it, or sometimes we kind of feel weird because maybe we were raised in a tradition that is like, oh, like that's not in the Bible, right? But yet there's something about this vocabulary of energy, like we're around people and we know. So think about in your own life, okay? Let's do a little thought experiment. Think of people that you've experienced that bring in energy, And if you don't like the word energy, fair enough. Think of the emotional atmosphere that you encounter around them. It's just energy is easier to say. But we all bring an emotional atmosphere to a space. Now, this is a shout-out response now, okay? We're going to go back to my Pentecostal roots, okay? So I want some participation, call and response preaching now, okay? Have you ever experienced the energy of a selfish soul? Yes, you have experienced that. Okay, what words would you describe that experience? Draining. Ooh, I like that. They're draining. Okay, what else? What was that? Icky. Good technical word. I like that. I got to write a paper this week. I'm going to work icky in. That works. What else? Dismissed. Narcissistic. Right? I didn't hear anybody be like joyful. Like, I want to spend more time with that soul, right? I heard words that bring up this idea of heaviness and discouraging and fearful and like wah, wah, like uncaring. Okay, now, like your whole body kind of shrinks into that, right? Now, let me ask you this question. Have you ever experienced the energy of a generous soul? Yes. Now, what is that? Like, what words would you use to describe that? Uplifting. Life-giving, encouraging, validating, comforting, loving. I love it. Okay, no more. Stop talking. It's my time. Man, y'all, give an inch, take a mile. It's ridiculous. If you're a guest, you're like, is it like this every week? You're like, kind of. It's equally weird every week. Equally weird. Now think about that. What kind of church do you want to be a part of? Which one of those? Right? Like, which one do you want to invite your friends to? Which one do you yourself want to come in and experience when you're having a rough week? Like, what's the energy that you want, right? I heard words that make me think of things like light and encouraging and joyful, caring, miraculous even, I think would be that idea. And here's the beauty of it. Generosity is a matter of spiritual formation, and it manifests through our physical actions. Let's unpack that statement. Generosity is a matter of spiritual formation, and it manifests through your physical actions. You cannot be a generous person and never open your mouth, never open your wallet, never move your feet, never rearrange your schedule. You can't do it. It manifests, it flows out of actual embodied activity in the world. You can think yourself all kinds of things, but you cannot think yourself generous. It doesn't work that way if I just think about it real hard. You can't pray yourself into generosity. Oh. You can't do it. You'll go find your prayer closet, your little war room, whatever you want to call it. You cannot do it. It doesn't work that way. It is a spiritually formative reality, yes, but it requires the manifestation of our bodies, of our words, of our actions. And so spiritual formation means that generosity isn't static. It's not something you're born with. I was born generous. No. Sorry, I wish that were the case. I was not always a generous person. Some might say I'm not. But it's not something you're born with. It's not something you're just stuck with. It's something that we can grow into through our actions and in partnership with God. Now, that's where prayer comes in. That's where spiritual habits come in. But it's not that we're either selfish or generous. We're a combination of both. How many of you are a combination of both? You know, I'm not a binary person. How many of y'all know there are certain people in your life it's easier to be generous with? Right? And there are certain organizations, there's certain things. So it's not that, I'm either or. We're like in moving, right? We're in flux. Now, this idea that we talked about last week is important for this week's conversation, okay? And if you weren't here last week, we unpacked this idea of we can choose to live for ourselves, we can choose to live for others, both are problematic, or we can live for Christ. And living for Christ is this land of sharing one another's burdens. Now, this is important with the concept of generosity. Isn't it crazy how these things build off of each other sometimes? Okay, so when we live for ourselves as a matter of generosity, right, what does that mean? That means that we are creating something called greed and selfishness. And that is unwise generosity. And if we're living for others, right? If all we're doing is living for others, then that can create what we might call irresponsible generosity, where we aren't caring for ourselves, we aren't caring for our families, we aren't, and so we're just like give, whether it's our time or our talents or our money or whatever it might be. We're giving, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, I got all these problems. I've got to actually eat. I need food, clothing, shelter. Right? And then we find ourselves in an equally problematic space. And so this idea of living for Christ, it applies to generosity. It's sharing the burden of this world, right? And that creates wise generosity. That I don't have to, in my generosity, meet every person's need. I don't have to meet one person's need fully, but I can participate. I can participate in the meeting of a need. It's how nonprofits function. It's how churches like ours function. It's not that one person, which by the way, if one person wants to carry the financial load of this place, see me afterwards in the atrium. I can tell you how many zeros we need, okay? How many commas, all right? Let's forget about the zeros, we're talking commas, people. But that's not how this is meant to work. That's not how shared, healthy, wise generosity works. But it does manifest through our actions. That's what we want to unpack a little bit today, right? We want to unpack what are the actions and the attitudes that we can have that will form in us a soul of creativity, of generosity. Some of you were like, oh, thank God, no, we're not going to talk about money anymore. No, generosity. We want to talk about what are those things that then I can emit energy into wherever I go. Wherever I am, that I can have the kind of energy we all said we want to experience in others. You familiar with that old song that says everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die? You heard that, right? It's the same as true with generosity. Everybody wants to be generous, but nobody wants to give. And there's just no other pathway, right? There's just no other pathway than we learn to give of ourselves. And I think fundamentally, if we can learn to give of our money, the giving of other things is easier. The hardest thing you will ever give away, I just believe this is true because of our culture, capitalism, the world in which we live, will be money. That is the hardest thing to give away. Time, yeah, that can be a treasure, I get it. Wisdom. Sometimes kind words, like giving compliments to people is really hard. But I think if we can learn to give away our money, then it makes all those other things easier, right? It's why Jesus said you can't serve God and mammon, right? He started there. You're going to hate the one and love the other. So there is some wisdom in our scriptures around this idea of generosity. And I want to talk about some of this. I want to talk about some wisdom that we can pull from this. Now remember, I'm not a rule book guy, okay? So the scriptures that we read today, we're looking for wisdom. We're going to claw at them a little bit, roll around in them like a pig rolls around in the mud, see what sticks, okay? So if you've been in a church that's been heavy-handed with, here's a Bible verse that says about giving, and this is what you have to do, and if you don't, then you're living under a curse. That's not who I am. I don't believe that, okay? So I just want everybody to take a nice breath and go, what does our tradition offer us around this idea of generosity? Okay, so Paul, who is typically attributed to writing 1st and 2nd Corinthians, these two letters in the New Testament. So we're just going to say Paul. Paul believed that wise generosity flowed out of gratitude, that it ought to be an act of gratitude. Now remember, Paul was a Jew. And he was a really, really good Jew. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees, he says, which means he followed the law to the T. And what happens is Paul is going around and he's collecting an offering for the church in Jerusalem. The church in Jerusalem was facing persecution. It had grown. It was struggling. And so Paul was writing to the communities that he had founded. And he was saying, hey, when I come, I'm going to collect funds, or I'm sending so-and-so, and they're going to collect funds. And by the way, Paul got accused of mismanaging funds, and he defends himself in some of his other letters. And so all the stuff that we would expect to happen normally, like people not liking, was all there in the first century. And so Paul is talking about this extra gift that he's giving. So he's not talking about like what it meant to be Jewish and to sustain Judaism of the time. That word didn't exist, but to sustain the temple, there was a whole set of principles of tithing and what you brought in. He's talking about something completely separate. He's talking about a voluntary way to help the hurting church in Jerusalem. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7, this is what he says. He says, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Does that mean God doesn't love a cheerful giver, by the way? No. That's just like, how many of you like a couple different kinds of ice creams? And then you're like, oh man, I love strawberry. Doesn't mean you don't like, what God is saying is, what Paul, I think, is driving home here is there's something about cheerfulness. There's something about you setting aside a portion that you can give in a manner that produces joy in you that God loves. And believe it or not, I think that this verse is probably more pertinent to our current reality than other verses that talk about tithing. And I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. But this principle of tithing was a civic reality. It was almost like taxes. And those taxes helped maintain the temple. It helped maintain the priesthood. It cared for the poor. It made sure all of the sacrificial system took place. A lot of stuff happened there. But like, how many of y'all know that our taxes, if you pay taxes, which you should pay taxes, because it promotes a middle class, and that's really, really good for the economy. I'm not an economist, but I've been in places that don't have a middle class paying taxes, and there's so much suffering. So this idea of giving a fair share, right, in our taxes to support infrastructure and care for people, like that's kind of built into a certain degree in our society. And so I think that this is important that we bring this principle to our giving, that you really should figure out in your life what can give you joy to give, and give that. Let's as a starting point. I think there's wisdom in that. I think that there is a lack of wisdom in giving what's going to produce, not pain in the sense, because sometimes no matter what, depending upon your view of money, like giving away $1 or 50 cents could produce pain. But like, what can give you joy? What can give you peace? Then set that aside and give it regularly to whatever, okay? Like, whatever. If you're not into church and you don't trust church, I get that, right? So give it somewhere else for a while. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Right? So this principle of there's a graciousness. I'm giving it out of gratitude for my life. I'm giving it out of gratitude for the opportunity to help, to give to a cause that I believe in. There's this spirit of gratitude. This isn't law for Paul. Law for Paul was different. He followed the law. Trust me, he did. He was given that tithe. He was bringing that in. But he's saying, hey, give it cheerfully because that will transform you. And this is what I've learned. I've learned that as people start to give cheerfully, whatever that is, it tends to grow. It's kind of like anybody here invest for retirement, right? Anybody handle that on your own? You're like brave enough to do a little bit on your own. What do they always tell you? They always say, risk management is like, it's unique to everybody. And when you first start out, a lot of times your risk tolerance is pretty low. And you might make an investment and you go, okay, no problem. If I lose that, I lose it. There's a joy in that. There's not a stress, right? So your giving tolerance is a similar idea. You shouldn't give what you're going to stress about. I don't think that's healthy spirituality. But what I found is just like risk tolerance grows and changes, giving tolerance does too. And you grow in generosity. So you got to start somewhere, okay? Now, that's Paul. Here's what's interesting, though. I know you might not believe this, but Jesus, he actually thought that wise generosity was an act of ethical responsibility. So Paul is talking about, hey, like, give cheerfully, give joyfully. And Jesus gives us a little different picture. Jesus said this, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. By the way, Jesus talking to my profession right there. He says, you give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. I don't know if you've ever seen like cumin or a mint leaf or a dill leaf. Like, he says, you are so particular, like 1 for God, 9 for me. 1 for God, 9 for me. And that's not even true. It was probably more like 37% when you actually add up all the things that were there. He says, what are you doing? Woe to you. And you got to imagine, it doesn't make sense. If you're sitting there listening, you're like, why did he just woe us? Woe? Why? I don't deserve to be woed for that. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. If everybody did what are you talking about? They're like, why did we just get woed? You woed me, Jesus. Not cool, dude. Not cool. It's like, okay, well, hold on a second. Here's the woe to you part, because you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. What? Yeah. Oh, yeah, wonderful. You filled all the law. You gave your 10%. Now I'm talking to those of you that have been around for a long time. That like 10% is like no problem. Where are my no problem people, right? You get it. You've lived in that for so long. You've seen the spiritual law at work. But maybe there's a neglect of something really even far more important that might cost more than 10% of our lives. That might be actually more difficult when we get down to it. And he says, you should have practiced the latter. So Jesus says, yep, keep bringing in the cumin, keep bringing in the dill, keep bringing in the meat. He doesn't disband that. He doesn't say don't do that. He says, but don't do it at the neglecting of the former. You think that you have done this great service, and you haven't. You're missing the whole point. The point of bringing in the 10% is to make sure that you recognize there's an ethic to it, that there's a responsibility, that there is a justice issue, that the world isn't distributing as God distributes. And so don't think of your spirituality. Don't think of these things that you do in fulfilling the law as somehow making you all good and taking care of all the injustices in the world. No. Jesus says you should tithe, but don't neglect justice and mercy. Don't neglect the other things that will cost you more than 10% of your money or of your time or of your life. So let's talk about this idea of the tithe for a second. Tithe means 10%. Oh, I shuddered. Some of you just like shuddered. 10%, okay? I am not going to tell you that you have to give 10% of your money to the church, okay? Everybody just take a nice deep breath, all right? You can do that if you want to. The tithe, the principle of the tithe is a part of Christian tradition, and we use it as, most people use the word tithe to just think about giving, okay? They don't even put a percentage to it, but the tithe was really a very specific idea. It was this idea that how do you say, hey, I'm doing my part? How do you say I'm giving? How do you say that I'm surrendering this area of my life to something bigger than me, to a vision bigger than my own dreams? And so this idea of tithing enters into the tradition, and it stems back to Jesus, which stems back to his Judaism. And it was 10%. Give away 10%. And it goes back, there's even a prophet named Malachi. In Malachi chapter 3, verse 10, there's this scathing prophetic word. And the critical scholar in me reads this and goes, this is the people in charge just trying to get more money out of the people. Like I see it happen today, like this. But here's the thing, Malachi was a prophet. He wasn't a priest. He didn't make anything more by this word. It didn't benefit him. But he sees what's happening. He looks around and he gives a word to the people about how they're neglecting justice and mercy by neglecting the tithe. They're not honoring the law. And he says, will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. And you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. And then Malachi says, you're under a curse, your whole nation, because you're robbing me. And he says, the answer is bring the whole tithe into the storehouses, that there may be food in my house. And this is the only time a prophet or anyone ever uses this phrase, test me. I mean, this is like bold words. Malachi's like, test me. God is saying to test God's sovereignty in this. Test it. And see if I won't throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing, you will not have room to store it. Only time. Now, again, the deeply skeptical, critical person in me is like, come on, Malachi. You just recognize the mortgage is due and you don't have it all. And so it's like, we're going to throw out this language of cursing and we're going to really scare the people. This is a polemics of power. Foucault would say, you're problematic. And there's a part of me that says that. But then there's a part of me that recognizes that this is a prophetic voice who's calling the people to act with justice and mercy in every other space. And this is a prophetic voice that speaks to the leadership that's actually responsible for the use of those funds. And the prophetic voice in general has some pretty scathing things to say to that as well. And then there's my lived experience. And my lived experience tells me that there are spiritual laws at work. And that this encapsulates a spiritual law. That in our lives, and I've heard it this way, like you can't outgive God, that in our lives you reap what you sow. How many have ever heard that one? You reap what you sow, the law of sowing and reaping. And it's true in this realm of our finances. And so, believe it or not, I actually believe that this does speak to a deeper truth, that there is something that we are robbing of ourselves. And I believe that you are all an embodiment of God. And so here's the kind of funny thing is I just think we rob ourselves. If the same Spirit that raised Christ from the dead lives in you and lives in me, and faith is taking that Spirit out of dormancy and surrendering to it and its power at work in us, then at the end of the day, we rob ourselves when we don't live generously. And that's the principle that I pull from this. Do I believe that people who don't give 10% live under an active curse of some God who lives in the sky? Would somebody please answer that for me? No, I don't believe that. Do I believe that when we do not give generously, when we do not give systematically, when we do not recognize that our own stuff is not of our own doing only, do I believe that we live under a curse of sorts? Well, you tell me. You said that people were miserable to be around, unloving, uncaring, icky, technical theological word, but we'll unpack that later. Here's the funny thing. Most people that live in a space of selfishness are so worried about money. And most people that live in a space of generosity worry very little about it. Isn't that fascinating? In my own life, I've never worried about money I've given away. And I'm proud to say that I've given away a lot of money in my life, percentage-wise. And I've grown in that. Our family has grown in that. And I'm very proud of that because I feel like I was helping the world. and I don't feel that that's pride. I don't think that's, because here's the thing. I have received so much more in my life than I could ever imagine. And sometimes I don't know who to thank for it. You know what I'm saying? Like sometimes I get so confused about the idea of God. I'm like, I'm just grateful. But I don't know who to be grateful to. So I'm just going to be grateful. And I'm going to show my gratitude to this organization. I'm going to show my gratitude to this person. I'm going to meet this need. I'm going to give up this and do that. This isn't enough. It's like, that's beautiful and wonderful. And I think that's all wrapped up in this idea of bring the whole tithe into the storehouse. Okay, so we got to move on. Proverbs believes that wise generosity is an act of selfishness. And that's what I've been getting at. Wise generosity is actually one of the most selfish things you can do. Because you are the storehouse of God, by the way. You know, we are all God's prosthetics. Nothing gets accomplished. God does nothing without your mind, your hands, your feet, your time, your bank. You are God's prosthetic. God is a God with a disability. I don't know if you know that or not. God has no arms, no hands, cannot walk, cannot talk in this world. Just through us, through humanity. And so Proverbs actually says, here's what's crazy. A generous person will prosper, and whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. It is so selfish to be a generous person. And I'm okay with that. Like, I would be lying to you if you said, well, my own journey of generosity and giving and tithing and then moving beyond tithing was solely based on I just want to do good in the world. Oh, heck no. Like, I started giving when we were in the most financial, like we were young. We had just had two babies. We lived in I mean, the, I don't know how to say this. The SWAT team was on my street multiple times a year. Let me just put it that way. The house next door was 100% a crack house, 100%. And we're trying to raise babies. I could tell you some of the stupid things I did in my life during those seasons. But honestly, I was at a point where I was like, okay, we're going to give, we're going to do this. And we just started giving 10%. And I would be lying to you if it was it just came out of the goodness of my heart. I was like, I'm going to test God in this nonsense. And I can honestly say, I never looked back. There were moments where I was like, I don't know where this 10% is going to come from, but I had fun being creative about how to make it happen. And it was a joy. And that just put us on a journey that we find joy in that. And it is, I'm just not going to lie to you and say it's not. I give out of selfish motivation. It makes me feel really good. It makes me feel really good to try and be a model and to lead in that way. It doesn't make me feel good to lead in other ways, but this one does. I don't know why. It just does. It gets me excited to try. I don't know how this is going to happen. I think because it's I'm going to lead in prayer and I'm going to pray an hour every day. Well, but if I say, I'm going to give this much this year and I have no, and it can be fun and we can give out of joy. And so here's what I don't want us to miss. Move on and do important stuff. We're going to sing together, do it the real deal, the communion, which empowers us. Talk about a symbol of generosity, the one who gave his life for justice, who gave his life for the righteousness of God. So generosity is a win-win way of living. It heals others, it heals our world, it refreshes, and it restores ourselves as well. The blessing is for everyone. And it's not always a financial blessing. It's not always, you give and then, you're going to give $1 and then God's going to give you 10. It's going to be amazing. It's like the ultimate Vegas. No, that's not how this works. But it's amazing. I can only speak to lived experience here that whatever the percentage is that is left over for whatever reason, I can't explain it, is always more than what it was before, 100%. I think there's wisdom, you're just more responsible with less. I don't know if you know that or not. The busier you are, oftentimes, the more responsible you are with your time. It's kind of the same way with our money, right? The more we think about how to leverage it and use it, we're more responsible at times. So there's lots of factors in there. But it's a win-win. So in your everyday normal life, I want to encourage you with a couple of things. First of all, I ask myself this question, especially in my job. As a person who's the soul, I'm not the soul, but it starts with me in terms of fundraising for this organization, okay? Am I the model of generosity? If everybody gave the way I gave, where would our church be? I ask myself that question all the time. I will not ever stand up here and offer an opportunity to give that our family hasn't already given to or hasn't committed to giving to. I just won't do it. It's just important for me. And so I want to encourage you to ask yourself this question. Maybe not about the church, but you can ask it what would this church be like if everybody adopted your model of generosity when it came to financially supporting the work? Okay, let me ask this question. What would the world be like? Forget about it. You couldn't give to Crossroads Church. We didn't need it. Imagine that. Wouldn't that be wonderful? No, it'd be terrible because it's what creates in us generosity. It's the opportunity to give. But let's say you then had the opportunity to just give it. Let's say we had a $100 million endowment as a church and we could give away a whole bunch. And any money you gave we're giving it away. And you don't even have to give any more here. You can just give to stuff outside of this space, right? If everybody in the world modeled your view of generosity, where would the world be? Would there be less poor people? Would there be less hungry people? Would there be more justice? What would that look like? And that's an internal question for you. I can't answer that. And it's not meant to guilt you. It's meant to offer you the same wisdom that Paul said. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. That passage haunts me. Because there are areas in my life I'm like, do not follow me as I follow Christ. No way. Do not follow me as I follow Christ. But it's a great question to ask. Would I want my life to be, not would I want my life to be on a screen for everybody to see, but if somebody came up and said to me, hey, Ryan, just between you and me, how do you all do your giving? How do you all do this or that as it relates to spirituality? Would I want to share that? Would I want to encourage somebody in that? Ask yourself that in your own life. How do you do that? How can you be that model? And then I want to encourage you to take one action step to grow in generosity this week. Take one action step. So here's the thing. If in your life you have never made a donation, you've never given away anything, and that may very well be, you've never had the opportunity, I want to encourage you to give somewhere for the first time. Give to something you believe in, okay? It doesn't have to be Crossroads, okay? Because again, listen, this is not about us and our financial health. That's a separate conversation for members and regular attenders and people. That's a different conversation. This is about you and I becoming the people we want to be, not icky. So this week, if you've never made a donation anywhere, give to something at some measure that gives you joy, okay? I'm not asking you to sacrifice your mortgage. I'm not none of that nonsense. Don't go sell jewelry. Unless you want to, and that brings you joy because, it's from your, a moral enemy, and you still had it and you want to get rid of it, okay? Sell it, By the way, that was a really pulled back joke. I was going to give a really inappropriate joke about what jewelry you should sell, and I held it in. Okay? So I'm growing, all right, people? I'm growing. I'm doing my part, okay? So that gives you joy. Now, here's another next step. If you're an irregular giver, right, you kind of give out of emotion. There's an opportunity, there's a chance, there's a time, wonderful. Well, I want to encourage you to become a regular giver. Give the same amount every month, every week, right, every quarter, whatever it is. Whenever you get paid, however that works in your world, give the same amount to that organization every single time. And just become a regular giver. And I tell you what, those nonprofits, I can promise, they love those regular gifts because they just help them plan. It really is amazing. Having led lots of different types of nonprofits and worked and done consulting, I can tell you, people would rather have that gift spread out because they just know, it's coming, or if it's once a year, they just know. So give regularly, right? Maybe that's your next step. Now, if you're a regular giver, okay, so you're regularly giving, but you're not giving at 10% of your income, I'm going to challenge you to test God and give 10%. Take that next step. Go for it. And again, I'm not talking about giving it here. I wouldn't tell you not to, but that's not the point, right? That's not the point. Give away 10%. Maybe you say, well, I'm going to give this to my church. I'm going to give this to this organization because you know what? Wendy and I have made gifts to NICU units. Both of our kids were in the NICU units when they were born. We've done that in the past, right? You can give to these things. I'm not a law person, okay? So I would encourage you, take that, and that I would call that a systematic giver. You have a system of giving in your life then that says 10%, I'm going to live into this principle of the tithe. That's part of my tradition. I'm going to test this reality and see, is my life filled with more joy, more love, more peace in this? I used to do this thing called the 90-day tithe challenge, and we would do this nonsense. I would offer a money-back guarantee. I don't know if y'all ever did this here. John, did y'all ever do this? Yeah, we did it. We're going to give you every penny back, which was totally illegal, by the way. You cannot do that. The IRS will not let you do it. Once you make a donation to a nonprofit and the nonprofit gives it back to you, huge problems. You can't even do it, right? But we would say 90 days, give it a try, test God. And if at the end of it, you don't sense more peace in your life, more joy, more love, if you don't sense God at work more, then we'll give you every penny back. I never had a person ask for it back, thank God, because I would have had to break the law. But I would challenge you just on your own, do that. Set a time period, whatever it is in your heart, and say, this is what do you think? Let's do it. Let's try it out. And hey, I'm a lived religion kind of guy. If you live it out and you're like, I'm actually grumpier, I am actually a worse person, I am not doing this ever again, then don't. That's fine. But maybe make that step. Now, here's the big one. Oh, some of you are like, peace, I'm in. I've done this. I've given 10%. I give more than. I've given 10%. I've been giving 10% for a long time. And you're like, I got no place else to go. I'm there. I'm not going to have you raise your hand. But here's the deal. I want you to become an extravagant giver. I want you to make that step more and add a % this year somewhere that you love to something. Grow in that generosity. Grow. Like, most of us would not be satisfied if we had the same job or were at the same level of maturity that we were 10 years ago. Yet for some reason, this is like Jesus. He's like, well, you hit your spot and then you're out. So don't let the church rob you of this wise, generous way of living. If you've had a bad experience with the church, if you have felt like churches are all about your money and you have felt abused and you have felt manipulated, don't let that rob you of the joy of generosity. What I'm saying is, give it to something else. Give it to something else. And I mean that in all seriousness. Don't give it here. If that's a hindrance for your life right now, then don't. Because believe it or not, the core of my job is not to make sure the bills are paid here. The core of my job is to help you find spiritual health in a way that works for you. Okay, so just don't let an experience in a way in which leadership or some space manipulated and attached spirituality to money in an unhealthy way. Don't let it rob you of and turn you into an icky person. You know what I'm saying? So find another organization and give for a while. And then I would hope that over time, if this is your church, you'd feel comfortable and safe, and maybe you have conversations and you talk about it. You know, you'd want to do that. But start someplace else. And what this does, this makes the world a better place because we move from scarcity to abundance in our mindset, right? We move from scarcity to abundance. Scarcity is fear, competition, focus on deficiencies, risk averse. I only have this much, right? But the abundance mindset is that, like, God is a God of a cattle on 1,000 hills, right? Like, the earth and the fullness therein is there. And we move to that idea of abundance, okay? And in abundance thrives possibility. And in abundance thrives healing. All right, take a breath. We're going to have communion now. If I have said something today and you have a question about it, or it offended you, or it in some way triggered something in you, let's talk. Because my heart here in this conversation, I'm going to have other conversations this year about this place and our financial reality and our future, but this conversation today is not about that. This conversation is about you and I as individuals and then the kind of church we're going to be. This church is a generous church. This church donated $2 million of equity to the Affordable Housing Project, and I'm just going to be real honest with you, it would have been nice to have that $2 million in the bank. But that's not who we are as an entity. There's a trust that we built into it. We give away money every year through our Partners in Hope. And we have a whole group of volunteers. We have a staff member that function in this, and we raise money. And in our Partners in Hope, we give away that. And our goal is to raise and release $1 million into Partners in Hope. We don't give all of that away. We use some of it for programs. We use some of it for salaries to raise the money in there. But our goal is to give away the far majority of that to groups doing the same thing. And in doing that, we are a generous church. When people call, we do our best to help. We have a benevolence fund that we fund as much as we can. We are generous to our staff. We don't want our staff to live in a poverty mindset. We really don't. We try to be generous. Like, this is who we are as a church. And that's our value. It is to not live for ourselves and keep everything in. I am so excited that we have all these houses that are going to be built and ways for people to find affordable housing in our community that would never have happened without our church making a significant sacrifice. And I don't know where that sacrifice is going to lead us as a church, but quite honestly, if 300 families have homes, that seems like a pretty decent sacrifice to make. So that's who we are as a church. We want to be the space where people walk in and feel that energy. So we're always going to give opportunities to give. That doesn't mean you have to give at every opportunity. But because we're a generous church, we give opportunities like Spooky Palooza and things like that. All right, somebody should warn the kids' church that they're going to be in session for a few more minutes. We're going to have communion together. We're going to sing a couple of songs. You're going to want to stay to the end because we have a video that is going to blow your socks off. That's absolutely crazy. But we're going to have communion today. And as we have communion today, I want to encourage you to consider the generosity of God in your life, where you have experienced the joy of gifts and the joy of things that you really can't put your finger on how it arrived in your space. Could be peace, could be healing, could be finances, could be whatever. But this is a good opportunity in this moment to just reflect on that and to be overwhelmed with that heart of gratitude. Right now, I'm super grateful to be in this space, to live in Northern Colorado, for my career to have brought me to this group of people. I am super grateful for that. And so the truth is right now, like we just give everything here because I can't tell you how grateful I am to be a part of this story that's beautiful and wonderful and powerful. So whatever that is in your life, just consider that as we have communion together. Everyone is welcome. These symbols remind us of the generosity of God that is found in the demonstration of love of enemy and forgiveness of Jesus on the cross. And in his resurrection, this great mystery, we are empowered to go out and live in that same way, generously giving our love. So we're going to have some Jesus snacks today, and everybody's welcome at the table. The body of Christ broken for you and the blood of Christ shed for you. Would you stand, please? And whenever you are wanting to, please make your way to the tables, and tables are set already.